One of the most important issues that we see all over the country in soybeans is iron deficiency chlorosis, or IDC.
Well, there are several things that will cause this appearance on plants, and what you'll see is interveinal chlorosis. So the veins on the leaves will still be dark colored, but the plant tissue in between those veins will turn yellow, and it could even turn brown if it's a severe enough case.
I gotta jump all over this thing here. There's one thing, it's called high pH. If your soil pH is above 7.3, you've got an issue, and you are very likely going to have iron deficiency chlorosis.
Well, also other things that have been shown to
make it worse are
things like high levels of nitrates, high levels of carbonates in soils, high levels of salts. Those things can all add to the problem. And just kind of like you were saying, Brian, there's one main stressor that gets it all going. It's we've got some kind of issue that's causing the pH to be high, typically drainage. And then all of a sudden these other factors come into play, and now you've already delivered that one punch. Now it's pretty easy to come in with the counter punch and hit it with additional stress factors that are really going to impact your yield.
Okay, so there are two strategies to this. One is people look at the short-term fix. I call it the Band-Aid approach. And especially if it's rented ground, hey, I get it. So first and most important thing is to pick the right varieties. Pick a good IDC number, and then you're in pretty decent shape. But also, I would consider adding more iron. They call this a disease. It's not a disease at all. It's just a fact that the plant doesn't get enough of the right form of iron inside it. It's because that soil pH is too high. But what you can do is you can supplement with more iron, put iron in furrow, green beans, soy greens, something like that, and that does make quite a difference.
The other things culturally that you can do is plant a higher population through those areas. You see, what happens with soybean roots is they're actually excreting organic acids, trying to bring nutrients back in and make those nutrients available, pulling them off soil colloids, etc. So if we're putting more plants in those acres, we'll typically see the beans not turn as yellow or even yellow at all, just because we have so many more acids going out there to negate the effect of that high pH.
When you talk about this yellowing, you can certainly go spray a foliar iron product, but what we found is, yes, it greens the plants up, and if all you're trying to do is make people impressed because your plants are green, great. But in terms of yield and payoff, it's usually not there. We've been talking so far about the Band-Aid approaches you can use. The last one I'll mention is elemental sulfur. Throw 50 or 100, maybe 150 pounds of elemental sulfur out per acre, and banded it would be much better than broadcast, but you can do it either way.
All right, so there's a lot of things. Brian calls them Band-Aids.
Whatever
the case may be. They're short-term things, and you know what? If you want to raise a successful crop this year, hey, those things are great, and you're going to have to do those. But what's the long-term fix?
The long-term fix is put some tile in the ground. You've got to fix the drainage. The reason why your pH is high in most cases is you have poor drainage. And a lot of people will say, well, I have tile lines out in my field. Yeah, and guess what? Where your tile lines are, your beans look a lot better, don't they? So you just don't have the tile lines close enough. We've got to get that soil pH lowered. And it's not going to happen instantaneously, but we've done it on our own farm, taken 8 pHs or low 8s and brought them down into the low 7s in a period of about 10 years. You can do the same thing. So if I owned the ground, there isn't even a question. I'd be getting a bunch more tile out there and I'd fix it.
Hey, let's talk about this too, because one of the things that happens in a lot of these lower depression areas is guys will put a tile inlet in, and it does remove those big rains. When you got a big pond out there, it's going to help remove that a little faster. We don't like tile inlets for a lot of reasons, mainly because they're going to move soil, chemical, fertilizer, all those things that are on the surface of the soil, they can move that right down that inlet. We don't like it for that reason. But the other one is it's leaving all this salt and nitrate and all those things that we don't want, the carbonates and so forth, in that soil, and they aren't getting properly drained. So instead of that inlet, put tile in. Maybe it's every 10 or 15 feet just through those small little areas out in the field. It doesn't end up being that much money, and really it isn't that terrible much work, and it's a permanent fix, so you don't have to fight IDC every year.
Couple of last things. We now have a drill on our farm so we can change soybean varieties on the go as we plant. So we have one new field we picked up. Don't have the soil pH fixed yet. We were able last year to change varieties on the go. That's great, because here's what it comes down to. If you can only pick from 2 or 3 soybean varieties that are good on IDC, your yields are going to stink compared to if you can pick from 50 different varieties that are racehorse numbers. That's awesome. That's what we want to do. So we really encourage you, fix the soil, and then you're going to have a lot higher yield in the long term. But in the short term, obviously, you're going to need the Band-Aid approach.
Well, also think about how much more money you're not going to have to spend on all these Band-Aids that we talked about, whether it's putting out those iron products or putting on elemental sulfur and so on and so forth.
Well, whether you have good drainage or not, you're still going to be facing weeds like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?